Hi, it's Jim Welninski with ON1. I just spent 10 days in Scotland, up in the Highlands, wandering around the landscape, photographing all the glens and castles. And I have to tell you that if you've ever wanted to go there, you really should go because it's everything that you would expect and more. It is a land of magic, let me tell you. The weather is amazing because it changes every 5 minutes. And I can't say enough about the landscape. It's just breathtaking. My ride through Glencoe is something that I'll remember for the rest of my life. I came back with 7,000 photographs, and I've been excited to come back and share some of these photographs with you, which I'm going to be doing over the coming weeks. Today, we're going to work on this photograph here of Kilchurn Castle, and we're going to do a little bit what I call visual magic with this. The photograph as you see it now isn't bad. It's pretty darn good, actually, but we can make this a lot better. This particular frame here is a blended frame. It's two exposures put together, and I did that before I brought it in to Photo RAW, and we're going to do some really cool things with this. I've made a couple of presets for you so that you can replicate the look and the effects that I'm showing you. And then we're also going to do something a little special at the end and do a little bit of light painting, which is always a lot of fun. So let's dive right in here. So I'm going to take this photograph over into layers. And the first thing I'm going to do is make a copy of it. And I'm going to call this layer Sky. We'll just double click on the name right here and we can rename it. So I'm going to call this Sky. I'm going to change the blend mode of this to multiply. And why would I want to do this? Well, multiply is a darkening blend mode, and as you can see, it really darkens the sky and gives the sky these rich looking colors. So I'm going to turn the opacity of this down a little bit. Now I need to make a quick mask here, and the quick mask tool is my friend. So I'm just going to go ahead and choose the quick mask tool and paint in my sky, just like this. And let quick mask do its thing. And you can see that it made a really nice mask. Now, the mask is obviously backwards because it's darkened the foreground. So all I need to do is right click on this and choose invert, and it will invert it. And I get this really nice dark looking sky, which I can adjust as I see fit. And I think I like it like that. That looks pretty good. So what I want to do now is call for a stamped layer, which is going to bake those two layers together. And we're going to double click on that and rename this Master 1. And I'm going to make this a smart layer by clicking on the gear here, which means that I can come back after I take this into effects and re-edit this if I want, and all my changes, all the things that I did in effects, will be intact. So let's go over into effects. So I want to really play with the contrast here and the color, and I'm going to show you a really cool trick in a couple minutes using the black and white filter. But first we're going to add a dynamic contrast filter. So I'm going to click on the new Add Filter button here, and I'm going to choose Dynamic Contrast. So that's a little heavy-handed. So I'm going to bring my medium contrast back a little bit, like the small where it's at, kind of like the large, just like that. I thought about maybe adding a little bit of vibrance here, but then the sky gets a little funky, so I'm not going to do that. And we can come back and edit this in a minute, and we're going to probably. So I'm going to add another filter, and this one's going to be the tone enhancer. So what I want is to darken some of these shadow areas just a little bit. So I'm going to pull my shadows down just a hair. And I'm going to pull my highlights up just a little bit. And maybe just a touch of tone compression to just kind of open this up a little bit. So here's my before and after with that. It's subtle, but this gives the photograph a little bit of shape. Let's add another filter, and this one's going to be the color enhancer, which is right here. So I want to make my greens pop a little bit, and I want to warm them up. So I'm going to choose my greens here and push the saturation. I don't want to push it that far. If I push it that far, you get that kind of neon green thing. I'm just going to saturate them a little bit, and I'm going to move the hue back towards yellow so you can see what's happening. And the reason I want to do that is because this is a sunset photo, and I'm going to try my yellows and move those back a little bit towards yellow as well. So there's my before and there's my after. So I like the way that looks. So the big issue for me at this point is that the castle kind of blends into the background. And I really need to bring that forward. I need it to pop out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a little trick here using the black and white filter to change the way this castle behaves. So the castle's gray. Gray is kind of close to blue, so there's definitely some blue in here. You can see that there's some blue in here. I'm going to add a black and white filter, and I'm just going to accept the defaults. It doesn't really matter. And I'm going to change the blend mode of this, because what I want to do is take the tonal qualities, the tonal values of this black and white layer, and apply them to the color layer. So I don't want to see black and white. I want to see color. I just want to use the black and white layer to manipulate the tones. If I click on the gear icon here, you can see that I get my blending mode options. I'm going to click on this and go all the way to the bottom and change this to luminosity. Now if I start to play with my colors, you can see what happens. They get brighter and darker depending on which sliders that I move. And that's assuming that my conversion method is based on color response. But I don't want to do that. What I want to do is I want to look at the RGB channels of the image and mix them in a different way. So here's the default. If I push the slider to the right, I start to lean more towards, you can see, more towards the blue channel. And you can see what happens. My castle starts to pop out. It starts to come forward. And I like that. Now, I don't like what it's doing to my sky, so I'm going to have to mask that out, which is easily enough done. I'm just going to grab my masking brush here, and I'm going to turn on the perfect brush. My opacity is going to be 100%, and I'm going to leave a nice feather on it. I don't need the brush to be that big. And I'm just going to come along here and just trace along the borders of my mountains here. And now I'm just going to paint the rest of this in. So I'm going to turn my perfect brush off, and I'll make my brush nice and big now. And I don't need a feathered brush. Turn my feather off and just paint this in like this. Okay, just till I've got the whole thing painted. Now you could easily do this the other way. You could easily mask out the sky instead of the mountains. I just chose to do it this way. So now I'm just going to invert my mask, and you could see that what I've done here is bring my castle forward and left my sky alone. But I've lost some of my texture that I gained with the dynamic contrast control when I did that, because the channels are mixed differently, and so the tones are going to be different. So now I can come back down here and add some more medium contrast to that. Maybe a little more large. Let's pull some of that medium out. And I'm liking the way that's looking. So I'm going to say that I'm done, and it's going to kick me back into layers. There we go. So here's my before, and there's my after. Before and after. And you can see that this is really starting to move forward. Now, one thing that I don't like is I don't like the way that these reeds up in the front here are starting to darken up. It's starting to distract from my image. So what I'm going to do is just invert the mask on here by holding down Controller Command I. And now I'll invert it again so it's white. So I have a white mask on here. And I'm just going to grab my brush and make sure my perfect brush is turned off. And my opacity is at 100. Feather, I want a little more feather on there. And I'm going to use a big brush. Not too big. That's about good. And I'm just going to come across here and just mask that front part out. And that looks pretty good. So now we're going to play with some of the light here. This is where the fun part starts. This is the light painting part. I'm going to ask for a new color fill layer. And I've already picked a color here. It's this orange color, and it's based on the color that's in the sun. And I've changed the blend mode to overlay, which is a contrast mode. And I'm going to click OK. So I'm going to invert the mask on here. There's a mask on here now, but it's white. And nothing's going to happen until we make a brush or do something to this, unless I invert it, which is exactly what I want to do anyway. So I've got a black mask on here. This is now hidden. So now I've got my brush, and you can see that my perfect brush is off. I'm going to use a feather on my brush of 100%. And I'm going to use an opacity really low, somewhere around 20. And a brush about that size. And now I'm just going to start to paint in a little bit of light. I'm going to create a light source right here. And you can see what's happening. I'm using a Wacom tablet because it allows me to be pressure sensitive. And so I've just created a nice light source here. So I'm going to make a copy of this layer. And the only reason I'm going to make a copy of it is because it's already got a mask on it. So I'm just going to make a copy, and I'm just going to reset the mask by right-clicking on this and just hitting reset. And then invert the mask again. And so now I'm going to start to bring light in on the side of the mountain. I'm going to make my brush a little bit smaller, and just start to paint in here where the light would be falling. Now, I know I'm going over my castle, and that's okay. We're going to fix that in a minute. A little bit on the edge here, and I want a little bit spilling down this way. And I'm just using light brush strokes to try to blend this in. And I know I'm going to have some light down here because that's where it starts to flatten out. I'm going to have a little bit on the tops of those bushes down there. And a little more there. And that's looking pretty good. I'm going to have some out into the clouds up here. And I like the way that's looking. A little more on the top. I think I might splash a little bit over here. So I'm going to make one more copy of this. And once again, I'm going to reset my mask and Control I, invert it. And I'm going to go back up in here with a smaller brush and just make this light source a little more intense up here, like so. Now I can adjust the opacity of these layers if I want, if I think it's too much. That looks pretty good. I like that. This one, looking good. And I'm going to go back to this fill layer here and just work to splash some of this down over here. All right, so now I've got to fix my castle because it's got orange all over it. So I'm going to zoom in here like so. Move this up into the center of my screen a little bit. And I'm going to grab my perfect brush now. So click on the gear icon, click the perfect brush, and I want my opacity to be at 100. And I'm going to leave my feathering where it's at and just make my brush smaller. And I'm going to tell Photo RAW that I want to paint out. So we're going to make this smaller. And now I'm just going to go up in here and just paint this out. I'm going to paint some of this back in a minute, and you'll see why. I made a little mistake there, so I want to paint that back in. Just going to click right there. Whoops. Let's just paint that out. There we go. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my opacity to about 10. And now I want to paint in. And I'm just going to paint on the edge of this just to give a little light on the edge there. Perfect. And let's paint out a little bit. That's a little too bright. That looks pretty good. All right. So I'm really happy with the way that's looking. So we're going to do one more thing to finish this off. Well, one more step to finish this off. I'm once again going to call for a new stamped layer by right-clicking on the layer and then just choosing new stamped layer. And it's going to make one for me. And I'm going to call this Master 2. I'm going to convert this to a smart layer so I can go back and edit it later if I want. And I'm going back into effects. So we're going to do a couple of things here. The first thing I'm going to do is add a glow. I love the glow filter in Photo RAW. It's really versatile, allows me to do lots of really cool stuff. I'm going to leave this at soft light and just push the amount up here. And things start to get darker. But I'm liking the glow that I'm getting here. Really moody. Now, I don't want it so much on my castle because it starts to make things soft a little bit. So I'm going to grab my brush again and make sure that my perfect brush is off. I want my feather to be 100, my opacity 100. And all I'm going to do is just make this a little smaller and just come across the bottom here. I've decided that's a little too much, so I'm going to undo that. Controller Command Z. And I'm going to make my opacity, about 60. And now I'm going to paint. And I like that a lot better. So that's looking pretty good. I'm going to add one more filter here, and we're going to go Tone Enhancer. What I'm really interested in here is the curve, right? Lighten and darken stuff. So I'm going to darken this substantially, like so. And now I'm going to paint on here to bring some of my stuff back. I'm going to grab my brush, and I'm going to paint. Let's paint at 50, more or less. And I'm going to bring my whole sky back because I don't want that to be too dark. And I'm going to make my brush as big as I can get it, 2500, and click. Click again, click there. That's a little too much, So we're going to reduce the opacity of this to about 35. Click again. And I'm going to go to 20 here. And click over here. Just to bring some of that back. I'm going to go to about 10. Just to bring some of my mountain back. And that one I can leave the way it is. One more thing, almost done. One more tone enhancer. And again, I'm after the curve. I'm going to pull this up like this. And let's invert this mask. I clicked on the mask to bring up the mask controls. Invert to hide that. Now I'm going to bring my opacity up to 50. And just click right there. Whoops, I want to paint in, not paint out. And maybe one more. And so there you have it. One more thing I think I might want to do is if I have each channel available to me in the curve right here. So if I go to the red curve and I bring the red curve up, I'm going to add red to my image where the mask is revealing this. If I pull it down, the opposite color is magenta. So what I want to do is add just a little bit of red. And I'm going to go to the blue channel. Pulling it up adds blue, but pulling it down adds yellow. And so I can just warm that up just a little bit. A little less red, I think. And there you go. We could call that done. I'm going to click here. And it's going to kick me back out into layers. And here's my before. Not bad. And here's my after, something completely different. I was after Lord of the Rings, and you can tell me if I got it. I think I nailed it pretty well. So Photo RAW gives me all of the tools that I need to make something really special. And the final product here really reflects my experience at this location. Maybe it didn't look exactly like this, but this is what I experienced. And you know what? I'm all about making the art. I consider myself an artist that happens to use a camera. And I believe that a great photograph should be a record not of the thing that you photographed. It should be a record of the encounter that you have with your subject. So I hope you found this valuable and that you learned a couple of things. There's 2 presets in the RAW file that you can download. And so go ahead and work this out and put a comment on the bottom of the video and let me know what you think and how you're doing. See you next time.